Capita envisions a future in which children and families can flourish. By prioritizing our youngest children, their families, and their communities, we have the potential to radically transform the fabric of our societies for the long term. In this series of Capita in Conversation, we talk to interviewees from around the world to hear their stories, knowledge, wisdom, and ideas on how to create child and family flourishing. In this episode, Capita Senior Fellow and Instructor in Neurology at Harvard Medical School, Marcus Corbin, interviews writer and civic advocate Pete Davis, discussing how this culture of restlessness and indecision is causing tension in the lives of young people today.
This idea that as I was growing up, I had two differing messages sent to me. So formally and explicitly, as I was growing up, like in high school and college, and really extremely when I was in law school, was this message of keeping your options open. The message that was sent to young people was, the purpose of this education is your advancement. You should choose jobs that will help you keep your options open for future jobs. You should move to places that will help you keep your options open for future places. Don't get tied down. Don't attach yourself to something that will slow you down. Keep your options open. It was almost like a religious creed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as I was growing up, informally, that was the explicit message. The informal message that I was getting, like Mark Twain says, never let your schooling get in the way of your education. So the schooling was telling me keep your options open. My education, the deeper sense, was, looking at collecting heroes, people that I started looking up to. I started thinking about, Fred Rogers, the children's education host, Dorothy Day, the great Catholic worker founder, Ralph Nader, the great consumer public interest fighter. I started looking at these heroes that I was collecting, like elders to look up to, and what they all had in common, they're all different, working on different things, working on different causes, being in different places. What they all had in common, though, was they totally ignored that advice of keeping your options open. They were committed to particular things, particular communities, particular causes, and they worked at them over the long haul. And more importantly, it wasn't just looking up to elders. When I was looking at my peers that my friends that were earning respect, the ones that were earning the least respect were the ones that were keeping their options open the most, the ones that seemed like they were flaky, the ones that seemed like they were just in it for themselves, that had shape-shifted to whatever the latest thing was that would help them. Being a fair weather fan, and the people that were earning the most respect were the ones who totally dived into things, the ones that, you would text your other friends on a chat thread and say, oh my gosh, James is really going for it. He's becoming a Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor. Or, Anne is really going for it. She's going to marry him. They're really going for it. They're moving back to Kansas and doing something, or moving back to their in the Bronx and running for alderman. The people who made a commitment to something were the ones that people were respecting, not the ones keep your options open. So that speech in this book, long-winded, a long haul in itself, this opening statement, but the speech in the book were basically rectifying that divide.
Right.
Yes.
Great. I mean, you can see this as maybe one manifestation of something that we might call liberalism, right? Like, a kind of reticence to define things too strictly and to kind of just laissez-faire, kind of like keep wide options. And so you would think that would be, that's America. But is this also in part class indexed, Pete? Because I'm sorry, I'm going to out you. The place where you gave the speech was Harvard Law School.
Yes.
And it may be that this sort of approach to life is not equally trumpeted and not equally practiced in Dubuque. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it takes, I have a part where I agree with that and a part where I want to push back. So the part that I agree with is my experience that led me to notice this is a very particular type of experience. I was probably in these schools that were the most extreme version of this whole place is about your personal advancement. And there are other places where that's less the message. But there are other things that are telling you to keep your options open, no matter where where you fall in the culture, where what walk of life you're coming from. The fact that the internet is and that the internet, not only that the internet exists, but that major companies of the internet are all about streams that feed you more and more and more novelty, and that the whole ideology of the internet is presented around, we are here to increase your choice and increase the amount of options you have and show you things that could be better and maximize your story in life, from the swiping on the apps to going through 1,000 random profile cards to just kind of streaming through an Instagram feed of people being incentivized to share make everyone feel the fear of missing out. And the result of the fact that this is baked in deeper than just in these kind of fancy higher ed places, that it's baked into the internet. It's baked into our economic system that says, we're not going to value rooted local enterprises. We're going to throw things into mergers, positions, roll things up. Means that, I have friends in state prison. I want to say the most extreme example of a place where you don't have many options. I have friends in state prison who tell me that this message resonated with them because even them have to go through the basic human phenomenon of making choices among different things. They might not get to decide where to go or, when they get out, but they have to decide what religious program should I attend? How should I spend my time? Should I, continue this relationship with this person I have on the outside? Should I read this book or that book? And they say that idea of, they say, oh, I respect the other guys on the yard that have committed to something on the inside. So, this is a phenomenon that applies everywhere. And I'm very open in the book about caveating that. I tried to not have this be one guy's stories from his own perspective. I interviewed 50 long haul heroes from all walks of life.
Great. And I definitely want to get to those heroes because the book is mostly an affirmative argument, right? Like you're not doing as much diagnosis as you're doing sort of like prescription. But I'm curious what you think about the sort of deeper origins of this culture. So on the one hand, you might think of it as like the culture that would result from like consumer capitalism, right? You always have to make more desires, right? If we're going to have year-over-year growth every year, right? Like we need more desires, right? Because our needs are being met pretty comfortably in most cases. And so that you always need to stimulate the idea that like there might be something better, there might be something more, right? Like maybe just over the next hill, there's something that would make you finally happy. Do you see this as being, in some significant part, an artifact of advertising and of consumerism, or somewhere older, deeper? How do you understand it?
Yeah, so like, how do we place this in time? What is causing this? So I talk about in the book on the psychological, I front load the individual and psychological, and in the back, it kind of spools out into the cultural and institutional. So let's start with the individual experience of keeping your options open. And then that can make us all kind of reflect on what are the cultural things leading to this. Right. So I think the individual experience comes down to 3 fears. 1, 2 that you probably have thought about before. 1 that I think is really present, but hasn't really been identified popularly yet. So the 2 we've thought about, 1 is the fear of regret. It's basically this experience of having so many options that you see all the possible ways you could be, all the places you could be, people you could be with, causes you could fight for, institutions you could join, professions you could join. And you're scared of picking one because when you pick one, you have to close 100 doors in that experience. It's experience that's like a negative mutilation of all your potential futures you could have. And you're scared you're going to wake up in 20 years and regret not having picked something else. And I think the cultural thing connected to that is just the proliferation of open options that are presented to you by modern life, advertising presenting things to you, the internet presenting things to you, really legitimate liberation struggles, opening up options for many more people. I had a chapter of the book that got cut. I hope I can publish it in an essay somewhere about like the academic story of big stories falling apart through deconstruction. The constellations of meaning that people used to have before kind of the critical century, for good and for ill. Many of these were really good deconstructions of of these constellations of meaning that, basically people like Charles Taylor or others talk about as, meaning making not being something outside of you. The church is telling you what to believe, the country is telling you what to believe, the evil things like the patriarchy or white supremacy telling you what to believe, to everyone in their own little boat, navigating their own meaning, making their own constellations, making the choice. So that's fear of regret. Fear of missing out is the other most popular one you hear about all the time, which is I'm happy with the choice that I made. I'm not like regretting becoming a doctor. I'm not going to regret, committing to this person, but they're the best person for me, or they're the best place for me, or best cause for me. But you're inundated with distraction and uncertainty by seeing all the other things you could do. Not that you regret having made the choice, but that the choice comes with responsibilities. Like on the smallest level, you commit to a book club every Wednesday night. You're happy you committed to that book club instead of another book club, but there's a party on Wednesday night sometime a year into your commitment. And if you go to that party instead of going to the book club, it might not happen that week. And that's like the fear of missing out. And people are scared of like tying down their future, the vulnerability of tying down your future.
Right.
And then the one that's a lot of the same things, a lot of advertising and Instagram feeds and Tinder profiles are all telling you not just making it hard to make a choice, but after you've made the choice, they're distraction, novelty, temptation machines. And, saying nothing, nothing is ever enough. The stranger one that I think isn't talked about a lot, but is really present in our generation, is the fear of association, what I call the fear of association, which is the fear that what you commit to will bring chaos to your sense of identity or your reputation or even your sense of like personal control. So this is the idea, like, I don't want to really become a strong, public Jew or public Catholic because that'll make people think things about me. I don't want to come out for this presidential candidate because I'm not the type of person that's political. You hear with union organizing a lot that the first organizers, when they're trying to kind of go beyond the usual suspects of people and really start deeply organizing into the workplace, you get a lot of people that say, I'm not the type of employee who complains. And, you can see how that's starting their identity. They're thinking about themselves as an employee, and the union organizer wants you to make a commitment and transform your identity into a worker, not an employee. And that's like an example of, that's either identity threat, which is like, who am I to myself? I'm not the kind of guy that dates someone like this. I'm not the kind of guy who marries and lives this life. Or reputation. What will my friends think of me? What will others think of me? And then what I say is like sense of control is you literally in person have to deal with other people, which is when you make a commitment, you have to go to the meetings. And I have this part where I list off all the ways that people, what people do to each other in the messiness of community building. They bother, annoy, ask too much of, impose on, misunderstand, disappoint, scare, condescend to, judge, talk the ear off of, hurt, and belittle each other. That's human interaction. That's what happens when you join up with something, and you need what Father James Keenan and others call the balm of mercy, the willingness to enter into the chaos of other people's lives, willingness to walk through the chaos of community building, forgive not 7 times, but 7 by 7 times. In order to get through the valley of on one side, the security and power of being alone. There's a lot when you're isolated. You're fully in control, you're fully secure, but in the long run, if you pass through the valley of uncertainty and messiness and chaos of joining up with other people in something, you can get to the deeper security, deeper power, and deeper joy of community. But you got to pass through the valley, and there's a lot of fear of association in that. And what is the cultural institutional things I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. What makes us, makes the polling on willingness to be part of a country, be part of an institution, be part of a political movement, be part of a party, be part of a religion. That I didn't like in this book citing social science data too much because I didn't want to like cherry pick an argument, but the poll is so clear on that generation over generation, we are completely unwilling to identify with anything bigger than ourselves. That's a real social phenomenon happening in the last 50 years. It seems pretty clear. And what's behind that?
Yeah.
Love to.
I mean, yeah, it's some, I suspect it's some sort of failure of institutions, among other things. So I remember when I was in college, I took a class on sort of post-Soviet Eastern Europe, and civil society did not bounce back after the wall fell, right? Like people were extremely reticent to join things. And I remember reading a big trove of interview data, and people were basically saying that like, in order to join something, they would have to falsify themselves, right? They would have to not be true to their authentic selves because that had been their experience of joining, right? That like belonging under, these various state controls had required you to like lie, right? Like you had to lie about the state of the country, the state of the party. Like you have to be very careful around each other. You couldn't be honest. And so that even after that wasn't properly true anymore, people still had a reflex that like, oh, groups would be bad for me. Groups would require me to kind of maim myself in some way. So I mean, I tend to suspect that like people have on some level good reasons for the bad decisions they make. I mean, so I wonder if there hasn't been some sense in which a lot of those institutions have failed us in some way.
Amen. The really simple version of that is if you were in a bunch of romantic relationships and they all hurt you and did wrong by you, the other person, you're going to be very reticent to enter into another relationship again. And I think one of my messages in this book, just kind of to linger on that metaphor for a second, even though the book is also about that literal phenomenon as well. Wendell Berry talks about all of our commitments are like marriages. So it's actually like the romantic commitment of marriage is a lot like, our commitment to places and communities and causes and institutions. People say I'm married to my shop or I'm married to the art of engineering or something. Yeah. And I love that point, Ian, when you've had a bad experience in marriages, you're slower to get married. And when you've had a bad experience in committing to community causes or professions or civic organizations, that's going to hurt you too. And, I hope I got it across in the book. Well, I say all these polls are going down of our willingness to attach to religion and, believe in the political parties or believe in America. And that sounds like I'm finger wagging at the young people, but, the major part of the story, the minor part of the story is the young people having this like unwillingness to give it a shot again. But your part of the story is America let you down. Those religions let you down. Those institutions let you down. It was, when institutions get corrupted, it has a multi-generational effect of, doing this. And part of this book, come to think of it, you saying this is trying to tell us, in a kind way, I know they let you down. This was bad, but you cannot have the answer be in the long run. Like take some time alone, find your authentic self, reject the inauthenticity of what you were forced into. Yeah. If you linger alone forever, that's not going to be a fulfilling life, and that's not going to make anything better. We need to find a way to revive these institutions in this country and these religions. Be a thing worth connecting to again. And if you disbelieve in that project being possible at all, we're not going to get anywhere we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, people tend, so I think you and I have both been influenced by Putnam's Bowling Alone and that sort of explanation, that argument he makes. Something that I'm almost always struck by is that, you had this sort of like utopia of civic engagement for a couple of years after the war, right? And that we tend to think of as like, not just the high point, but like the default, right? Like we're supposed to be like enthusiastic joiners and belongers. And there must have been some failure of the generation following the greatest generation, right? My thought though, along these lines is, if you have a whole generation of people who see up close what something looks like they live in it, and then they flee with their hair on fire, right? Like there are important questions to be asked about what was going on there and what was the nature of that sort of utopia.
Yeah, one thing Putnam, I think, does, for those who don't know, Robert Putnam wrote this book, Bowling Alone, about the decline of community in America and the decline of these community groups. That's what Ian's referencing. The vulgar sense of Putnam, like when people like just hear the short version, they think he's putting on rose-colored glasses and saying everyone get back to the 50s. But he actually does a really good job in his actual writing of saying, my mission is not to turn back. It's to not throw out the baby with the bathwater, basically. It's like, he isn't telling the young people join the Elks Club and the Rotary Club and get back to the pews that were oppressing and belittling you. He was telling young people, he says it at the end of Bowling Alone, I want you to invent in the soil of the new world with the understandings of justice and the causes of equality that we care about in the new world, invent the new forms that have the similar spirit of joining in person, but excise all the problematic parts of the 50s joining culture. And I talk about in the book, a lot of the story of the increase in options of the last 20th century is a genuine story of liberation, and it's a story of a bunch of people who were forced into involuntary commitments, who were that they had no authentic connection to and were harmful and hurtful and great evil. And a lot of the story was throwing off the shackles of that over the last century, and we have probably another century or two of work to do on those continuing liberation struggles that are fighting. But to continue those liberation struggles, and also in general, we need, in addition to the spirit of liberation, we need the spirit of dedication. All those struggles themselves required a bunch of people to subsume themselves in something bigger than themselves. And all those continuing struggles require us to subsume ourselves in something bigger than ourselves. And just generally in life, saying I am free is not enough. It's free. There's a second step, which is free for what? What do I now want to do? What's the day, I tell it in a goofy way, the day after Billy Elliot in the movie decides, I'm not going to be a coal miner, I'm going to be a ballet dancer. Yeah. He still has to figure out 20 years. The movie ends at that point. He says, I'm a ballet dancer. I found my authentic self. But the next 20 years, he has to figure out, am I going to be a teacher? Am I going to go to try to be the best ballet dancer ever? What if I find out being a ballet dancer doesn't make enough, money for these other commitments I have to take care of my family? And he has to grapple with all these aspects of dedication and meaning, but that's never shown on the screen. And so part of my goal with this book is to talk about liberation, but also talk about dedication.
Yeah, so it seems like, politics is back, baby, right? Like, it does seem like people are identifying with political movements and it's sort of constituting part of their identity and all that. Not always in a good way right now, I would say. I think that in a lot of ways, our political climate is like too groupy, right? Like people have joined a little too hard in some sense, in some cases. So there's that, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But interestingly, I think this goes together with this. Today, their statistics came out showing that the birth rate in America has fallen to its lowest point ever. I think replacement rate is 2.1 children per woman, and I think we're at like 1.6 right now, which is like unheard of in America. We also saw this year that religion and religious attachment has fallen to its lowest level ever. So while I totally understand and agree that, attachment to a noble political cause is wonderful, I wonder whether this is not a strange and maybe dangerous kind of system of attachment that we're working on building right now, where like some of these kind of more, I want to say like existential sorts of attachments and belongings, like to your child, to a church, are withdrawing, and maybe politics and other things are coming in its place. I mean, how do you understand this?
One of the messages I have in the book is to say that Zygmunt Bauman talks about, who is one of the inspirations of this book. He wrote this great book, Liquid Modernity, about how we're kind of disattaching from everything. The more kind of intellectual version of this book is his book, Liquid Modernity. And he talks about like these apocalyptic moments, that happen when we're in a really liquid world. So when like the flood washes away our deep organic commitments, we miss it. We cling, we actually have as Simone Weil talks about, a need for roots. We want to be rooted. We don't want to be isolated. It might be fun to surf on all these interesting novelties, but there's a deep part of us at night when we're sitting alone saying, I really wish I was connected to something. Mm-hmm. To build organic connections takes a long time, but a lot of people are grasping at random quick fix connections. So they're like, if I can partake in the giant march in the streets, that'll be my moment. I'm part of something bigger. Or if I can give the big epic speech, or if I can go on Twitter and, follow a bunch of people and then like make the big clever takedown, I'll feel part of this thing because I'll get all these likes and claps on the back and these like quick moments of emotion. That's an apocalyptic. You see this in the most extreme version where, and I want to tread lightly on this, but like a lot of the profiles of ideologically motivated domestic terrorists are people who are deeply ideological, but they actually are not part of any civic groups at all about their ideology. So they're like, I care deeply about this, but they never meet up with anyone. And there's all these studies out there on kind of fighting extremism that say, actually having the groups that do a light version of that extremism, like microdose the ideology, result in having organic leaders that want to normalize the ideology and keep their kind of wayward people in track. They give them lessons like, that's not the best idea. Stop building them. And so one of my arguments here, what's the opposite of apocalyptic commitment? These big moments, is the slow and steady commitment. Join the people who join up with the actual political causes and go to the weekly meetings. They might feel the deepest fire for the cause in their heart. So it's not going to be an escape from politics. They're going to really fight for their cause and crusade for it. But they'll know that the way to move forward their cause is, eventually, sometimes it'll be big epic protests, and other times it'll be persuasion, and other times it'll be endorsing a candidate, and other times it'll be sitting at a big table and becoming part of an administration as a coalition. And it'll be the type of kind of pro-civic, actions if it's weekly meetings and not epic posting from the smallest version of actual posting to the biggest version of like setting a bomb off or something, and that's one of my pushes, is that let's move our politics and our religion. Actually, there's a lot of studies from Putnam on the people that are the most, divisive when it comes to fundamentalist religion are the ones that sit alone at home watching televangelists without ever going to the pews, whereas the ones who go to the pews actually end up having more cross-class interaction, more cross-race interaction, more pro-social kind of secular goodness with other people, that it's kind of religious social networks in person that lead to all the good things of religion, not necessarily the black brimstone on the TV. And so that's my theory of depolarization, is just more networks, commitment, pluralism, have more people, have more things that connect them in more ways. They say the best way, the one final thing on this is what my favorite thing is, some of these hunky-dory centrist people, when they want to like bridge the red and blue divide, they say, let's take an extremist Republican and an extremist Democrat and let's have them sit at the table and talk explicitly in an official political program called We Get People to Talk. And then, that never works, basically, because you come to that, you're in a political mindset, you want to show good for your side, you're totally have your guard up. The best way to have people connect is move to another area, like have a church or have a bowling team or have a local political fight that you're working on together, because there's interesting ideological cross currents on the local level, and then developing a real relationship with them, you let your guard down, you become a little more human, and you start saying, hey, maybe I should think a little bit more about the way they think about the world.
Yeah,
so
great.
Other commitments depolarize other commitments. So that's
great. Yeah, thank you. So we have a question that just came in, which actually leads us into where we need to go next. So Brian Martin asks, how have you seen people successfully reconciling the embrace of their authentic selves necessary for individual integrity with the denying of self necessary for healthy community? Does that make sense?
Yes, this is what a great question. So,
yeah. But this maybe leads us to your heroes, of whom you have many. So maybe we could talk about Brian's question in the context of these lives that you've seen where it seems to have worked well.
Yeah, I'll give some examples of after I kind of say a quick thing about kind of, I have a part in this book about the idea of an isolated and static self versus a dynamic and embedded self. And it's in the section on the fear of association. So like, what makes us fear having our identity or reputation implicated by commitments? The answer when I interviewed people that I kept hearing over and over again is, I noticed that the people that had that fear the most were ones that had the sense of the self as the set of like rigid categories that they've discovered through this ordeal of like just finding their authentic self. I like the Lakers. I like the Rolling Stones. I am an electrician. I am a liberal. I live in Texas. This is this is who I am. I have found this. And it's a precious thing to have that list because, your whole teenage years is the fight for finding what do I like and what resonates with me, what is me. And then they feel like they found this rigid self, and then they get presented with all these opportunities for commitment, and they say, well, that's not exactly me, and that person's not exactly me, and that person doesn't fit with this characteristic. And when you're a rigid Tetris piece and you see all commitments as another rigid Tetris piece, and we're so complicated and multifaceted, there are no pieces that are going to fit together. The people that made commitments and become long haul heroes are ones who see their self as a dynamic and embedded self. They see their self emerging out of their commitments. They don't have this lonely search for their authentic self. They join up with something, and with others, it becomes who they are. They join up with, that church, and the church becomes a huge part of their life. And now that is part of their identity. Now that is part of their reputation. They join up with a craft and they start mastering it and taking on mentors and watching old documentaries about, old YouTube videos about people who were great at that craft, and texting with other people about who are into the craft too, about, oh, did you see this latest thing about the craft? And slowly the craft becomes part of who they are. And the self emerges dynamically out of your commitments. And that kind of level of, knowing, there's still some limits. We're not just mushy people that can join anything and become part of it, though we're much more than we think we are. There's still things that are going to feel authentic to you and inauthentic to you, but you will only discover the depths of your true authenticity, the true thing that you own, through your commitments, and thus not having commitments threatens your path of discovery for yourself. Instead of having commitments threatens your path of discovery for yourself. And I saw this with so many people. My favorite example is Sister Mary Dacey in Pennsylvania. She joined up with a religious order, which is one of the most extreme ways of kind of making a commitment. It limits so many options for you. And what she found is she dropped a bunch of options by joining that order, but by sticking with it, suddenly she found out like the order had, it was a time where nuns were getting involved in social justice. So she's suddenly like getting involved in prison rights work. She was suddenly getting involved in inner city mentoring work. She was suddenly getting involved in leading educational institutions. No one, if she had gone the other route and, gotten married to her high school sweetheart at the time, it wasn't as easy for someone to kind of run an education institution if you were a woman in her city at that time. But because she joined this order, it opened up all these doors. That order had fights with the church too, and transformed the Catholic Church, had meetings with the Pope, and like were troublemakers and things like this. And her whole life has been this grand adventure because she made that choice to become part of this. And she said, I said at the end, what's the best part of it? Was it all the adventuring? And she says, no, I have all these like warriors in arms with me, all my fellow sisters in this order together. And that brings me all this joy and is an adventure into itself. I talked to Mickey Raphael, who is Willie Nelson's harmonica guy. He decides to commit to the craft of harmonica because he can't follow in the footsteps of his dad's furniture business because he failed shop class. And he practices by walking around the track at high school, learning the harmonica because he saw Donnie Brooks play it at the Rubaiyat Club in Dallas and felt the spark of the divine. He gets known all around town as this kid who's amazing at the harmonica. Willie Nelson comes to town and says he needs a harmonica player for one of his sessions. They say, you got to call Mickey Raphael. He does so good. Willie has him join the band. He travels for the next 40 years. And he says, I'm loyal to two things in my life, Willie Nelson and the harmonica. And it's resulted in him meeting presidents, traveling all around the world, being the most beloved, icon of his craft. And all these young harmonica players are I want to play the specific Marine band, Hohner harmonica that Mickey Raphael plays. What would that have been if he flitted around and never committed to this craft? So those are some examples of kind of you find who you are by diving in.
All right, great. So what is the way you put it, I could take up the harmonica, right? I could make a commitment like that. There's some commitments I've already made. And so in that way, I can sort of push back, or I can be a sort of, a resistor of some kind against the culture of liquid modernity. Is that basically the recommendation here, that yes, it's true, there are these structural forces acting on us, and there's a strong current in our culture, but you, Ian, in your little apartment in Cambridge, are free to put the phone down, put Twitter away, and get to work on something serious? Does it kind of fall to me as an individual, to other people? Is that kind of the way forward for us?
Let me quickly say something about craft, and then I'll get to that question, because it's important to show it's not just you alone playing the harmonica. It's you joining what Alastair McIntyre heads out there. It's you joining a practice, which is in craft. It's not just you alone get really good at something, though I talk about the joys of depth and expertise and things. It's that you become part of a community of other harmonica players who share tips and tricks and become something that cares about something together, and makes this practice that Alastair McIntyre would say produces goods internal to practices. That's his famous line, that the deep joys that come from, being someone who all play chess together and finding the joy of kind of mastering a move, or, this Jordan doc that came out a year ago about, the 97, 98 Bulls or something season. It's a practice. It's only maintained by all the scorekeepers and high school coaches and Hall of Fame maintainers and referees and players and coaches and owners and stadium custodians. This practice that makes it sublime that Michael Jordan won that game while he had the flu. It would have just been a random set of phenomena if they didn't maintain that practice. So that's the thing about craft. But the general question of, is this book about, this book, what's this book mean? What is the takeaway from this book? What is the action item?
Yeah.
The whole reason I felt, a lot of this book is in other books. A lot of the cultural criticism is in Liquid Modernity. Christopher Lasch, Simone Weil, Dorothy Day, George Shalaba, Wendell Berry, all these wonderful writers have written about all these things.
Yeah.
This is a real kind of a compost pile book of ideas in my head that composted out of kind of bringing this all together around this one theme. But I was really felt the need for this book because I wanted it to start from, not from a cultural criticism, woe is society, we have fallen, books of decline, very important there. I only wrote this because I love the genre of, reading 100 books of reasons we have declined or something. But I wanted to have a story that started with you as an individual. It's like a book written in the second person. It's actually officially categorized as a self-help book, even though it's probably the most unself-centered self-help book out there, but it's about like subsuming yourself and things larger than yourself. But about, I'll tell you about the cultural story that might be going on around you, but mostly I want it to be about you taking an action to become a more committed person, and in doing that, commit to a society, like result in our society being a more committed people. I have kind of this ulterior motive of the book, which is, my day job, the thing my big commitment in my work life is I really care about politics and civics. I really care about there being a civic revival in our communities, turning around the Putnam Bowling Alone phenomenon. And I really care about a lot of these justice and democracy struggles happening in politics. And I wrote this book partially because I think the Archimedean lever, the like single dial we could turn that would have the biggest impact on advancing justice, deepening democracy, deepening American solidarity, it's so simple, it's totally unprofound. Simply having more people work on those projects. It's not like get everyone to do the same strategy. It's not figure out all the clever tactics, have the perfect lens that everyone sees in the same way. Those are all important. But the number one prerequisite, I sometimes call this book like the prequel to everything else. The number one prerequisite is that people are working on things at all, that there are enough people working on 10, 20, 30-year projects, enough people sticking with things to fight for this, but to fight for these causes, or they will never move forward. And you find that the sticking with itness is more important than all the other clever expertise stuff. You rarely find someone who's really sincerely committed to learning, say, I worked at this for 10 years and nothing ever happened. I learned nothing and I regret doing it. What they usually say is, I worked for 10 years. We tried this thing out 4 years. We were in the desert. Then we found out it was all wrong. We learned this other way. Then we tried that. We've made some progress. Then I got 2 more years where we got this new theory of how we're thinking about it, and I'm moving forward. And now I actually think we're really kind of about to emerge or something, and I have these stories in this book, the 32-year walk of Evan Wolfson fighting for marriage equality, the 24-year walk for Lori Wallach changing our global trade regime. She called it turning around a steamroller in a small alley of corporate power. That's what she said her task was. And she said, I've spent 24 years getting it to stop, and now I'm turning it around after successfully getting it to like shove sand in the gears of this machine. And it's all because they stuck with it. And so that is the message of this book. You can do that. Though, and I want to stop here, but I can get into what leaders of institutions can do to help people. To paraphrase a Dorothy Day quote, she said, we need to build a society that makes it easier for people to be good. I think there's a lot institutions can do to make it easier for people to be committed.
Oh, it's wonderful. We actually have a question that I think connects here from Joe Waters. He writes, have you considered how the liquid modernity you've described is aided and abetted by the hollowing out of the professions, particularly in small towns and rural places? Doctors no longer train and then practice for 40 years in the same place. How do we reinvigorate them to be more dedicated or dedicated again?
Yes, I am this is definitely connected. I am very into, one of my happiest sections in the book is, that was happiest to write, was about 2 different forms of education. There's education for advancement and education for attachment. Education for advancement, I think both are present in education today from younger years up to higher ed. But I think education for advancement is winning. And here's how I define this. Education for advancement is education that's all about giving you tools to personally, individually advance, that help you, giving you resources to help you personally, individually isolated, keep your personal individual options open. Education for attachment is education that instills at least some reverence and duty, implication and responsibility for something bigger than yourself. Alfred North Whitehead, this great philosopher writer, wrote, the essence of education is that it should be religious, by which I mean it should instill reverence and duty. And I love it because, the original word religion It's lig in the religion is like ligaments. It's something that binds you, that connects you. And reverence is like the soft version of binding you. It puts you in such awe of something that you feel magnetically attracted to it. Duty is like the deeper, more hardcore version that says like you feel responsible for something because you've learned something and you have an ability to respond because you've learned something. You've learned how to be a doctor, thus you can address public health issues. You've learned how to be an architect, thus you can address the built environment. You've learned how to be an electrician, thus you can address the issue of like having a good electric system and houses on a small scale or on a big scale. And thus you are implicated and are responsible to do public interest work in that spirit. That's education for attachment. On the lower level of education, like younger kids, it's mostly just about getting kids excited about ideas and professions and causes and communities. But on the older level, like in graduate school, we have to ask ourselves, the people who are running graduate schools and agitating around them, and even colleges too, undergrad, are you a career academy or are you a profession academy? Careerism is about your own individual personal career. We call someone a careerist when it's all in it for themselves. They have no loyalty. They're there to keep their options open. They're flaky. A profession is a community of competence. It is a practice like what I talked about with basketball. It's a group of people that are working. Doctors come together. They take an oath. They hold up standards. They fight for public health. Lawyers, if they think about themselves as professionals, not in a let's be like, I think one of the lines of this book is like, let's be more professional, but not in the sense of like, we should dress up and not use cuss words. What I mean by let's be more professional is let's have moral content to our professions. Let's say, what is the mission of electricians? What is the mission of plumbers? What is the mission of social workers? What is the mission of lawyers? I was in law school, and when you tried to have moral discussions like that, like, hey, we carved on our building equal justice under law. We carved on another building, the rule of law is the supreme mission of the law. Those are the two missions of the legal system. The rule of law, not men, and equal justice under law. Everyone has equal power inside of that legal system. Are you challenging us on a daily basis in law school to think about whether our actions are promoting that mission or not? A profession would do that. Let's be more professional. And one of those questions you raised, Joe, of are the professions present in every place? That is one of the missions of every profession. We need to be out there serving everyone. There is an old idea that Adam Webb talks about of the clerisy. The people who are educated in the major cosmopolitan areas at the big fancy schools should re-spread out like the pastors or that go kind of live in the parsonages of the random churches. You go to a central place to learn special things, but then you re-spread out and return. What we currently do at most of these big fancy places, you suck people in and then you send them to New York.
It's brain drain. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know what is actually to be done about education right now, right? As someone who has worked in it pretty constantly for the past decade and a little more, I taught part of your book last semester to my business ethics students at a quite a good business school in the Boston area. And we particularly read the part about education, about professions, and they found it really inspiring. And I don't mean that I'm going to try not to end on a downer here. They found the book personally really inspiring, and they liked the model of education. They could sort of intuitively tell that this is a better way to be. But I also know it's a business school. I know that the vast majority of them will go into finance. And it's not that finance can't be a proper profession, but I think there might be something, a profession in your sense. I think there might be something about kind of designing tricky new derivatives that doesn't lend itself as well to the sort of cultivation of the group and cultivation of a practice as like practicing medicine or something, right? And so it does seem like, I mean, I think you're absolutely right on one hand. Like, I think your prescriptions are correct and they are freer than they realize, et cetera, et cetera. But I also just have a lot of sympathy for them because the institutions and the kind of conveyor belts that they ride on, as you know from your time at Harvard Law School and elsewhere, like do kind of tend to shunt them in one direction, right? And there's something deep that needs to happen. And you can try in the course of the semester to convince them that there are things more important than those sort of status gains and keeping your options open. But these are deep-seated messages that they receive all through their lives.
I have a thought of how those who kind of aspire not just to figure this out in their own life, but to be leaders for others and people who are in mentor roles or teacher roles, or leadership roles in institutions, what you can do.
Right.
I have two stories from the book on this that kind of add together to actionable items. So Bill Barry talks about this bucket hanging on a fence post. It's probably my favorite story I included in the book. The favorite metaphor I included in the book, which is it's a bucket I think it's on his grandfather's farm. It's like a very old-timey story. And it's a bucket hanging on a fence post and no one pays attention to it. It's just a bucket hanging there. And, all these things happen, like rain falls in there, animals scurry in there, dirt falls in there, leaves fall in there, bugs fall in there, die, are eaten by other animals, some feathers are left. And over time, he says the most miraculous thing happened, it makes earth. But it's like you end up with a beautiful soil that is rich for planting. And he says culture making is like that too. Stories fall, heroes fall, stories of big mistakes fall through time, lessons learned, hard ordeals that wisdom was extracted from fall into a community. And out of that comes culture. Like it's a composting thing. But what's the most important fact about this? The bucket was nailed there. Somebody has to be the bucket. A group of people have to stay there to collect the stories and be the bucket. That is a centripetal force, pushing against the chaos that says this will be forgotten or all those people will move away. We need institutional memory. And so when you stick with something, that is the first act of culture making. So then we need to make a culture. What culture should we make? And one of my arguments in the book is that we need to fight against indifference culture, which is like anti-culture, like nothing, no one caring about anything, remembering anything. Having a mission for honor culture. And an honor culture is a culture where honor plays a large role in community life. We win respect in community life by upholding community missions and values. People who exemplify that are honored by the community. You take seriously your roles in the community as a parent or a neighbor or sibling or an elder or teacher or treasurer of the local Audubon Society. And the community around you takes seriously your roles too. They say, thank you for doing a good job at your role. And the qualities of character that help in those roles, honesty, fidelity, courage, awareness, are noticed and celebrated, often sometimes formally through like rituals like initiations and inaugurations and commencements and retirement celebrations and Hall of Fame induction ceremonies and awards given out at the end of the year. And when you succeed, your community succeeds. And each of those parts of an honor culture that I talked about need people to take those actions. So one of my arguments for leaders and teachers is do the hunky-dory thing of, telling someone you displayed a virtue and telling the whole community, oh, I really want to honor this person for displaying a virtue. I really want to honor this person for holding up a role. I want to do an annual award that I'm going to give out every year. And it's going to become a storied award because of all the people who've gotten it over the years that I'm going to give out in my institution to celebrate people who lived up to our mission statement. We're going to have rituals when someone comes join us, and we're going to participate in it together where we all become what Jeffrey Bilbrough calls convocated. We all join in a vocation together, a little mini vocation. What is this class going to be? What is the mission of this class? You talk about missions on a daily basis. You don't just have hard and fast rules. You have soft, warm, and ever-present, virtues that you're holding up. And people have to do this. We have to take actions, and little by little, piece by piece, we can be that bucket and create that culture. That's my hope with this.
Well, that's a genuinely beautiful place to end, Pete. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Each episode of Capita in Conversation is produced by Michael Bettis and is available by podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as capita.org.